All right, let's talk about the housing market. Because if you're feeling a little confused by the latest numbers, well, you are not alone. We're seeing some seriously mixed signals, telling two totally different stories at the same time. So we're going to break it all down and figure out what's really going on.
On one hand, you see a report showing a decline. Then you see another one showing growth. It is absolutely confusing. So in this explainer, we're going to get to the bottom of the October housing data. We'll make sense of these mixed signals and what they mean not just for the economy, but for you, especially if you're thinking about buying a home.
Okay, so let's start with the number that's been grabbing all the headlines, and not in a good way. We're talking about pending home sales, the contracts that have been signed but haven't closed yet. Well, according to the National Association of Realtors, those fell by 0.4% in October compared to the same time last year. It's not a huge drop, but yeah, it's a drop.
And here's the thing, this isn't some new development. It's not a one-off thing. This decline is really just continuing what some are calling a long, rough stretch for the market. So you'd think, okay, more of the same bad news, right? End of story?
Well, not so fast, because this is where things get really interesting. Is that really the whole story? Turns out, if you just tilt your head and look at the exact same data from a different angle, the picture changes, like completely.
Get this. While sales were down compared to last year, they were actually up 1.9% compared to just the month before, September. A positive number. So, what gives? Is the market tanking or is it bouncing back? Which one is it?
And this slide really lays it all out, doesn't it? You've got the bad news, the long-term, year-over-year trend is still down. But then you have the good news. The short-term, month-over-month trend is showing a little spark of life. To figure this puzzle out, we have to go deeper. We need to look past these big national numbers. Because what happens when we start to dig a little deeper is we find out those big national numbers are actually hiding the real story. And that story is a huge regional divide. It turns out not all housing markets in the country are moving in the same direction at all.
And you can see that split so clearly right here. Look at the Midwest. It actually saw some pretty solid growth. But then you look over at the West, and it saw the biggest drop. This isn't just a small difference, it's a huge contrast. And understanding this split is key to the whole puzzle. So the big question is, why?
To get that answer, we've got to turn to the experts. Lawrence Yun, who's the chief economist over at the National Association of Realtors, he boils it down to one single critical word: affordability. He says the Midwest shined for a really simple reason. You can actually afford to buy a house there.
And then you flip that coin over. Yoon points out that contract signings in the West fell back for the exact opposite reason. It's just a much more expensive place to live. So there it is. The driving force behind these big regional swings is cost. It's that simple. Buyers are voting with their wallets and heading where they can afford to buy.
So now that we know affordability is the key, let's dive a little deeper into what the experts are saying. We're going to look at two leading economists. Now, they're both looking at the very same data, but they pull out slightly different takeaways, which actually gives us a much fuller picture of what might be coming next.
All right, so back to Lawrence Yun. He's looking at the big picture, beyond just housing, and he's feeling pretty optimistic. Why? He points to things like the strong job gains in September, saying, hey, this shows the economy isn't about to slip into a recession. And a stable economy, well, that's a solid foundation for the housing market.
And he also has a little silver lining for anyone who's actually trying to buy a house right now. He's saying that with the market a bit slower, especially over the holiday season, buyers suddenly have more negotiating power. That is a really important takeaway if you are out there looking.
But on the other hand, we have a more cautious take from Dr. Lisa Sturdivant. She's the chief economist at Bright MLS, which is a huge real estate data firm. And her prediction, she thinks that even with these little positive blips, home sales are probably going to stay sluggish for a while, like all the way through the end of 2025.
So why is she more reserved? Well, she's pointing to a few specific storm clouds on the horizon. For one, mortgage rates, which had dipped for a minute, are starting to creep back up. There's also still a lot of general uncertainty about the economy, and we're seeing some pockets where consumer spending is getting weaker. You add all that up, and you can see why she's taking a more wait-and-see approach.
Okay, so we've got one expert who's pretty optimistic and another who's a lot more cautious. But here's the most important part of this whole thing. Despite their different tones, if you listen closely, both of them land on the exact same fundamental problem. The one big thing that's holding the market back.
And that problem is affordability. We've said the word a few times, but what does it really mean? It's just the balance between how much houses cost, the price plus mortgage rates, and how much money people are actually making. When that scale gets tipped too far one way, the whole market feels it.
And Dr. Sturdivant just nails it with this quote. She says, affordability challenges are going to characterize the housing market for years. That's it, right there. This is the big underlying issue. It's not something that gets fixed by one good month of data. This is the long-term story we all need to be watching.
So let's just quickly recap the key takeaways here. First, those big national sales numbers are sending totally mixed signals. Don't get too excited or too worried about any one of them. Second, the real story is happening at the regional level, where places like the Midwest are shining because they're more affordable. And third, and most importantly, the fundamental long-term issue that every expert agrees on is affordability.
And that really leaves us with the big forward-looking question, doesn't it? The monthly numbers are going to go up and down. That's just how it works. But that core problem of affordability, that's not going anywhere anytime soon. So what on earth is it going to take to finally solve this affordability puzzle for American homebuyers? That is the real story we should all be watching.